I want to start because there's been a lot of discussion on the left in the United States among anti-war activists on how to make sense of what a just response would look like to Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine and the mass killing that we are seeing. We can take time to talk about the broader historical context, and you've been discussing this a lot in other interviews. But I want to just start by asking you, is there any aspect of the US, NATO, and European Union response to this invasion that you believe is just? The weapons transfers to Ukraine, the sweeping economic sanctions and attempts to entirely isolate not only Russia and Putin, but ordinary Russians. Is there any aspect of the government response to this by the US, NATO, or the European Union that you agree with?
I think that support for Ukraine's effort to defend itself is legitimate. If it is, of course, it has to be carefully scaled so that it actually improves their situation and doesn't escalate the conflict to lead to destruction of Ukraine and possibly beyond. Sanctions against the aggressor are appropriate, just as sanctions against Washington would have been appropriate when it invaded Iraq or Afghanistan or many other cases. Of course, that's unthinkable given US power. And in fact, the first few times it has been done, the one time it has been done, the US simply shrugged its soldiers and escalated the conflict. That was Nicaragua, when the US was brought to the World Court, condemned for unlawful use of force, ordered to pay reparations, responded by escalating the conflict. But so it's unthinkable in the case of the US, but it would be appropriate. However, I still think it's not quite the right question. The right question is, what is the best thing to do to save Ukraine from a grim fate, from further destruction? And that's to move towards a negotiated settlement. There are some simple facts that aren't really controversial. There are two ways for a war to end. One way is for one side or the other to be basically destroyed. And the Russians are not going to be destroyed. So that means one way is for Ukraine to be destroyed. The other way is some negotiated settlement. If there's a third way, no one's ever figured it out. So what we should be doing is devoting all the things you mentioned, if properly shaped, but primarily moving towards a possible negotiated settlement that will save Ukrainians from further disaster. That should be the prime focus. That requires, we can't look into the minds of Vladimir Putin and the small clique around him. We can speculate, but can't do much about it. We can, however, look at the United States, and we can see that our explicit policy, is rejection of any form of negotiations. The explicit policy goes way back, but it was given a definitive form in September 2021 in the September 1st Joint Policy Statement that was then reiterated and expanded in the November 10th Charter of Agreement. And if you look at what it says, basically says no negotiations. What it says is it calls for Ukraine to move towards what they called an enhanced program for entering NATO, which kills negotiations, increased sending of, this is before the invasion, notice, an increase in the dispatch of advanced weapons to Ukraine, more military training, joint military exercises, weapons placed on the border. We can't be sure, but it's possible that these strong statements may have been a factor in leading Putin and his circle to move from warning to direct invasion. We don't know. But as long as that policy is guiding the United States, it's basically saying, quote Ambassador Ches Freeman, it's saying, let's fight to the last Ukrainian, basically what it amounts to. So the questions you raised are important, interesting, just what is the appropriate kind of military aid to give Ukrainians defending themselves, enough to defend themselves, but not to lead to an escalation that will just simply lead to massive destruction, and what kind of sanctions or other actions could be effective in deterring the aggressors. Those are all important, but they pale into insignificance in comparison with the primary need to move towards a negotiated settlement, which is the only alternative to destruction of Ukraine, which of course Russia is capable of carrying out.